Warning: some of the images are graphic and viewer discretion is advised. The United States of America is on a mission. Not even those who are steering the ship have an idea what its overall goal is, but they are showing the world that its billion-dollar military-industrial complex is unstoppable and is going to dominate the globe, and the only way of pressing this agenda forward is to unite the world. But how will this power accomplish this? Well, let's see. In January 2017 was the swearing-in ceremony of a new US government. Many do not like to get involved with politics, but whether you like it or not, it will get involved with you. Mike Pence is the current Vice President of the United States of America. But what is his worldview and who is his inspiration? According to the Daily Beast, he is a postmodern evangelical Catholic conservative. And he told ABC News that his role model for Vice President is Dick Cheney. So the new administration will now echo the former Bush administration. For when George Bush was sworn in as the 43rd President of the United States, he forced the entire world to be US allies. And the Trump administration is singing from the exact same song sheet.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
And we have a fantastic team at the US-UN that's ready to prove that. Our goal with the administration is to show value at the UN. And the way that we'll show value is to show our strength, show our voice, have the backs of our allies, and make sure that our allies have our back as well. For those that don't have our back, we're taking names. We will make points to respond to that accordingly.
The United States is bullying people into coming in line with their program. But how did she get to this place? Let us take a trip across the Atlantic and journey through time to Northern Europe in England to a place called Plymouth, for this was where the United States was first developed. Though there was an English Jamestown colony that preceded the Mayflower of 1620, it was the Puritans who laid the foundation of the country we call today the United States of America. While on that ship, these Puritans began to carve out a new society, not even realizing the magnitude it would have in the succeeding centuries. The Bible was the epicenter of that community. But their problem was they were so strict that religious and civil liberty and free speech had no place in that new colony named after a British town, and any dissent was dealt with quite brutally. Baptists would be beaten on their bare backs because they had a different view of the Bible than the Puritans. This is important to take note, for history will repeat itself. One of the most famous was Obadiah Holmes, a Baptist minister, who was whipped in the Massachusetts Bay Colony for his religious beliefs and his strong biblical convictions. But it gets even worse when Mary Dyer, a Quaker, was executed by the Puritans and put to death because of her religious convictions. The Puritans had zero tolerance to dissent, though they themselves fled from England for the exact same reason. But they shaped the thinking of Americans in succeeding generations. If anyone wants to know why many Americans have an unquestionable patriotism to their country and get uptight and very defensive when anyone challenges it, then you need to study the Puritans, and then you will understand how the whole entire thinking works, from the government to the system of education, even down to the churches who struggle to separate their Christianity from their patriotism. With American Puritans, indeed, we find for the first time the beginnings of a coherent ideology. an ideology that is based on the premise of the ultimate separation of America, the New World, from the corruption and degeneration of the Old World. Seeing their migration as an apocalyptic revelatory event, American Puritans were the first to accord America a singular, independent role as a sacred place in the history of salvation. Geosophy is to geography what historiography is to history. It deals with the nature and expression of geographical knowledge, both past and present, regarding men's sense of terrestrial space. Geosophy therefore deals with human desires, motives, and prejudices towards space in time. Geopiety to denote the special dimensions of man's religious, emotional attachment to his terrestrial space. Religiography is religion that has to do with geographic actualities or the role of terrestrial space within the confines of religious thought and expression. The term geotheology signifies the theological nature and a meaning of space. Geoteleology deals with the destiny of the world within a theocratic universe controlled and directed according to the providence of God. The United States is a nation of immigrants. It has been flooded with them throughout its short history. And whether religious or not, they embrace the Puritan worldview of a utopia, the American dream. And these immigrants have helped to shape the modern world. Italian inventor and electrical engineer Guglielmo Marconi, though passing through, introduced wireless technology to North America. His fame has far outstripped another pioneer in wireless technology, a Serbian-born immigrant to the United States, Nikola Tesla, who, in 1943, the United States Supreme Court named him as the primary inventor of the radio, where aspects of television, X-rays, satellite transmission were foreshadowed in Tesla's work. Scottish-born inventor Alexander Graham Bell migrated to the United States and eventually settled in Canada. He trained school instructors at the Boston School for the Deaf and wanted to create a machine that could reproduce human speech that today we would call the telephone. Thomas Edison, unlike Tesla and Bell, was homegrown, though his father was from Nova Scotia off the coast of Canada. Known as America's greatest inventor, he greatly influenced the world with 1,093 US patents to his name. He is famous for introducing the phonograph, the motion picture camera, and the electric light bulb. But one man was to build upon both Bell's and Edison's foundation and expand upon their works. His name was Lewis Howard Latimer, an American inventor and draftsman whose parents were runaway slaves. Like Tesla, his legacy has been left unrecorded as one of America's greats. He was a member of the Edison pioneers, the Menlo Park Gang. And the New York Times newspaper in 1988 resurrected his legacy and showed to the world his unknown contributions. Mr. Latimer helped make electric lighting practical by devising in the 1880s a light bulb filament, the slender wire that the currents heat to incandescence that was longer lasting than previous filaments. He also oversaw the installation of electric lighting in streets and buildings in New York City, Philadelphia, London, and other cities, and was associated with Thomas A. Edison and with Alexander Graham Bell, for whom, as a self-taught young draftsman, he made the patent drawings for the telephone. So Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, but Lewis Latimer expanded upon it, having a longer lifespan. And when we turn on the switch in our homes, and when we see whole communities lit up, it was American inventors who have electrified the entire world. Latimer drew the draft for Bell's telephone, and we have now moved from analog to digital, and America still dominates the phone market via Apple. But corporations are expanding their monopolies and buying more companies to weed out any competition in the market, to make America a dominant player in in the world. And that is why Apple, alongside Alphabet, are the leading tech companies in the world. AT&T and Time Warner are also on a merger that will tighten things even more. But one of the biggest companies is, without question, Disney. While many think it is just for children's entertainment, it owns and controls Lucasfilm, Marvel, Pixar, Touchstone Pictures, ABC News and ESPN Sports, influencing all aspects of entertainment. But there are many secular writers on the left who have not only questioned her unchallenged rise to prominence, but have queried what ideas are they actually teaching children and putting into their heads. Walt Disney wanted to create a number of theme parks that expressed his worldview of a perfect utopian suburbia, and he received a full blessing by the Roman Catholic hierarchy in North America when expanding on these projects to create in the American psyche an escapist world. His main character, Mickey Mouse, was an expression of his alter ego on ink in animated form. Humble, chaste, cerebral, asexual, always in control, and universally adored. But feminists have voiced their concern how female characters are always portrayed in Disney films. They all more or less look the same, creating a picture in young girls' minds that a one-set beauty is the way you have to be and to strive to look like. Most of their most popular animations encourage children to go back to nature worship. In Pocahontas, that looks like an innocent love story but is a fabrication of history, it taught animism. And in the famous, very violent Lion King, it taught Hinduism's circle of life and ancestor worship, which is contact with dead relatives. But Disney has also become a part of the United States surveillance apparatus, where the Magic Band stores information about customers, which Disney uses to create a personalized service and to track users as they navigate Magic Kingdom. These bands look so innocent, but they keep a track of Disney customers as they enter into the park, where even little children's fingerprints are on a database. That is completely crazy. And where do you think all this information is passed on to? The United States Department of Defense, that oversees all agencies of the US government. It is nicknamed the Pentagon because of its shape, and they tightly work with Hollywood to influence the way films are produced to manipulate the public's views towards war. But they also work with the video game industry. Once known as polar opposites apart, this genre was once seen as a pastime for nerds, is teaching and desensitizing young minds about the realities of warfare, where top video game writers now work with the Department of Defense, and a cozy relationship is formed deep within the heart of military planning and tech designers, who both share ideas with each other. But while we are being edutained by the one-sided celluloid storytelling of the Pentagon-Hollywood alliance, another war is taking place, where the psychology of warfare that video games don't highlight are tearing US veterans apart, where there are 20 suicides of veterans a day. Sadly, US soldiers have always been used as guinea pigs to enhance the US war efforts. Atomic explosions in the Nevada desert has left many exposed so badly that they have developed cancers. But she does not just target her own, she does it to others also. And innocent lives in the Marshall Islands have also become targets, as well as the innocent islanders of Diego Garcia, who were booted off their land to create a US airbase. So the United States does not even hide that she is a brutal war machine, and the steady flow of Hollywood propaganda will desensitize the public and set the stage for the current administration to cause more misery on the earth via more wars.
We will be having the greatest military that we ever had by the time I finish. Win. We have to win. We have to start winning wars again. I have to say, when I was young in high school and college, everybody used to say, we never lost a war. We never lost a war. You remember. Some of you are right there with me, and you remember we never lost a war. America never lost. And now we never win a war.
So President Donald Trump has a desire for more wars so that the United States is a dominant world power, and an increase in military spending will lead to even more collateral damage and an increase in innocent civilian deaths. The Obama administration gave $38 billion in military aid to Israel in 2016. And Donald Trump, even in his cuts to boost the military, still aids Israel to be America's watchdog in the Middle East. And what about the drone program? Will that continue in 2017 and onwards? President Obama had a kill list where individuals were hunted, targeted, and destroyed. Donald Trump picks up where Obama left off, and drones incinerate innocent civilians who have no dealings whatsoever with the war, and US civilians are also killed. And in Donald Trump's thirst for more and more war, destabilizing whole communities, the end results are sadly very, very devastating.
American-led airstrikes in Mosul, and this morning those accusations that the airstrikes may have killed hundreds of Iraqi civilians in Mosul. If confirmed, this could be one of the deadliest instances of unintended civilian deaths since the war began, when the U.S. became involved in Iraq.
But the military says the rules of engagement have not changed since Donald Trump became president.
Donald Trump's desire to win more wars has led to the worst US-led civilian bombings in 25 years that the United States admits that it conducted. And Amnesty International documented that civilians were killed because they were told not to flee Mosul. So there is an increase of US special ops in the Middle East. But it is not the only region in Asia that is going to be a target. North Korea has made it very clear that it is ready for war with Donald Trump's United States, and it is sending a message by launching a ballistic missile that has landed in Japan's waters. But why would North Korea do that? Is not that asking for war? They are only responding to Operation Fall Eagle, the annual drill where thousands of US and South Korean troops train together in preparation for war against North Korea. The latest training has even drawn in SEAL Team 6, the United States Naval Special Warfare Development Group that has a ghastly reputation for committing war crimes and is revered as the most celebrated of the US military special mission units. But while America, via its tech wizardry, is making warfare look so cool and harmless, ignoring the true casualties of its global bloodbaths, and producing more America superhero flicks, another power is also expanding its empire, waiting for its right moment to reign supreme. Most journalists overlook her. Historians bleach her out of the record books. Politicians are paid to keep quiet about her. Religious leaders are blinded by her pagan mysticism clothed in a Christian garb. But they're all deceived of her true aims and objectives. During the Cold War, the United States and the Vatican formed a strong bond and a very tight, unholy alliance. They both had the same enemy, communism, and their aims and objectives were the same: to crush it at all costs, regardless of the toll of human life. And these are the two kingdoms, and their aims are going to form a union over again. The Northern Atlantic Treaty Organization, better known as NATO, is continuing a strong alliance with the US government, which means, guess what? More war. The Vatican, like the United States government, is also forming an alliance with NATO. But her thirst for war has been her drive to retain power and control from its inception. The Crusades was a bloody conflict between two continents and two faiths. Though it took place almost over a millennia ago, the bombings in the Middle East open up fresh wounds, for it is seen in the Arab world as a repeat of history, Western domination of the East. It was the French Pope Urban II at the Council of Clermont in 1095 AD who rallied up the men of Europe to conquer Jerusalem for the Catholic Church. Since then, popes continue to support war. Adolf Hitler, though economically propelled into power by the corporate cartel of Wall Street, was also fully supported by the Catholic Church, who gambled at their first attempt at having complete world dominion. Documents from the day show the cozy relationship the Vatican had with Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, and more evidence is coming to light that the Vatican and Pope Pius XII was in full collaboration with Hitler. But more evidence is coming to light that once she has total control of a state, cherished freedoms are diminished. In March 2017, Paul Kagame, the current president of Rwanda, and his wife paid a visit to Pope Francis I in the Vatican, and a request that was granted was met. In November 2016, the Rwanda government demanded an apology from the Vatican for her role in the 1994 genocide. The Pope did ask for forgiveness, but there still does not seem to be an apology, which looks like a very cunning tactic from this geopolitical Jesuit Pope. For the Vatican has put out a document in 2016 that it rejects its just war theory that has cost so many human lives. But this is a clever tactic to put people's guard down, and she has more clever tactics up her sleeve. Pope Francis I has created a clever ecumenical PR stunt to coerce all Christians all over the world in accepting the papacy as an asylum of hope and a voice for the voiceless, by showing Protestant, Catholic and Orthodox Christians as all suffering from Christian persecution. Even though there are persecuted Christians around the world, who do you think is one of its chief instigators? Pope Francis I paid a visit to Mexico in 2016 during the build-up to the US elections. He blessed the border, knowing full well that it is the route for men to illegally smuggle into the United States. But while he was performing his ceremony to strengthen Catholicism in that Latin American country, he was deliberately fueling and stoking a highly neglected issue that is rarely discussed.
Pues empecé a estudiar y
The people from the community threatened to come out and look for us and kill us. As a group, we were afraid we would be caught in public by them. When we first were expelled, I was just a little girl, but I felt the Lord has been working in my life through the last few years, and it's been a good time for me.
According to VOM Mexico, about 2/3 of the cases of persecution against evangelicals that they receive are committed against indigenous believers.
The Protestant minority in Mexico, who comprise the indigenous population, have been ostracized, jailed, humiliated, and sometimes even killed for not conforming to the Roman Catholic Church. It is a very downplayed issue, and you have to really dig to get solid facts. So why does Papal Rome still humiliate Protestants in the 21st century? The 19th century Scottish historian James Aiken Wiley said, "There is no mistaking what Popery has been and is. In all ages and in every country, it is the same. When did it live in peace with Protestantism, unless when it found it necessary to circumvent by fraud that it might destroy by violence?" In the following century, Italian-born London-based investigative journalist Avro Manhattan, a secular writer, reiterated the same words as Wiley when he said that the Catholic Church cannot and will not tolerate a form of Protestantism which refuses to be destroyed. And when the Pope paid a visit to Mexico, he was quiet on the Catholic persecution of Protestants in Mexico. Even at the doors, finds it very strange that the professed Christians of today and postmodern-minded secularists cannot see the papacy for who she really is, and that she has not in any way, shape or form changed. The Pope cunningly laments Christians persecuted, when the papacy is one of the chief persecutors, and Mexico should be a model an eye-opener and an object lesson for those to see what she can do on a micro level if she regains power on a macro level. It means your freedoms are over. The London Guardian documented the persecution of the Chiapas in Mexico, where there are dozens of evangelical churches in the town, a population of 190,000. Most branches of Protestantism are represented, with Methodists, Baptists, Adventists, and so on. In the 1930s, the first missionaries translated the scriptures into various Indian languages, says Ada Hernandez, a specialist on religions at the Social Anthropology Research Center. Chiapas is now home to Mexico's largest Protestant community. Their share of the total population, 27%, has almost doubled in 20 years, according to the Mexican Statistics Institute. Vincent Garcia, 33, a Pentecostalist street vendor, gave up drink thanks to God, but he paid a high price for his conversion. The Catholics drove out my family, says the former peasant farmer, who was forced to leave San Juan Chamula. It was get out or die, says Pascuala Lopez, an Indian of 25, whose house in the village of Hookston, southwest of the city, was burned down. Crimes are less frequent now, but the tension persists, Marquecho says. Last June, a pastor in Hookston, home to the Zeltal Indians, was murdered with his wife and 14-year-old son. The Pope is pushing for Christian unity. But would you unite with a geopolitical leader who does not believe that religion should not be confined to personal conscience, that free speech should be limited, and who avoids visiting his home country, Argentina, for fear of war crimes? The indigenous Mexicans who choose the Bible over the authority of the Catholic Church are persecuted in one of the most predominantly Roman Catholic countries on earth, where people are jailed for their faith, and the Pope is fully aware of what is happening. What may shock people is that despite the papacy's past and current atrocities, many of the major institutions on earth are looking to the papacy to resolve the problems of this world. That's frightening. Renowned English cosmologist Stephen Hawking has been a member of the Pontifical Academy of Science for years, and many of the top scientists in the world are working with the Vatican in an attempt to deal with the vast extinction of species on Earth at a workshop called Biological Extinction. But it is not just the scientific community who are looking to the papacy for help. The EU, the European Union leaders, are looking to the Pope over plans to revive the struggling bloc. Since Brexit, the EU has lost an economic asset in their community, the UK, and members of the EU at the 6th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome were told by the Pope the same thing he told all the Christians, that they have to unite. Another of the Pope's targets is the United States of America, by telling the American public at the Super Bowl that the game can promote world peace. Has anyone in the Vatican actually exposed the Pope to the film Concussion that details what that sport eventually does to the brain? But the NFL, once seen as just a sport, is like the video game culture. It is being exploited by the US military, where the Department of Defense pays thousands of US dollars to individual teams to honor the military during spectacular games. It has 185 million fans, which is 60% of the US population. The NFL has over 115 million views, making it the most watched show in US history, and the most watched show among women. The Pope has taken advantage of the most popular pastime in the culture of the United States, and while capitalizing on the climate change environmental agenda, he has full support by US actor Arnold Schwarzenegger. And with this level of popularity on the global stage, Donald Trump, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States, plans to meet the Pope at the G7 summit in May 2017, and we will await the outcome of that Trump-Francis alliance. But Trump and his desire to win more wars will make the world more intense and unstable. But who are some of the men in Donald Trump's camp? Well, let us take a sneak preview on some of the mechanisms of world politics. In North Sheen Cemetery in West London in England are the buried remains of one of the least known but influential individuals of the 20th century. In the Polish section is a simple grave with the name inscribed Joseph Hieronym Ratzinger, a Polish-born London-based political advisor who engineered the 1957 Treaty of Rome secretly behind the scenes. He created the corporate clique of businessmen, bankers, politicians, journalists, men in the media, and European nobility who would use their positions to influence undemocratic policies in their particular fields when he founded the Bilderberg Group, as his eulogy in the Times of London confirms. And though he attended the first set of meetings, he worked in the shadows and let others take the glory so that he would be undetected. In his memoirs, he tells us where he first laid out his plans. It was in London's St. James's Square in 1946 that Ratzinger conducted a lecture in this brown building known as Chatham House, or the Royal Institute of International Affairs, known as England's Council on Foreign Relations. Meetings that are discussed in this building can be shared to the public, but the identity of the speaker or speakers cannot be revealed. This is known as the Chatham House Rule, and Joseph Ratzinger adopted this method into his Bilderberg clique, where its official website confirms that the meetings are held under the Chatham House Rule. Today, the Bilderberg openly tells us who are the men on its steering committee, and one of them is one of the most powerful men in the tech world, Peter Thiel. Your average person has probably never heard of him, but many of the things you use today online was co-created by him. He co-founded the CIA-funded data mining juggernaut Palantir, whose algorithms penetrate not only into the files of US citizens, but also into the files of peoples of Europe. He co-founded PayPal, was or still is on the board of Facebook, and along with his colleagues created an array of companies, LinkedIn, YouTube, etc. He invited many in the tech world to meet with President Donald Trump in the Trump Tower, and even if they clash at times, they'll be working together. And this Bilderberg billionaire is Donald Trump's key advisor, where the president will receive regular advice and updates on the developments in the digital tech world. When interviewed by the New York Times, Peter Thiel told them of another billionaire who himself and Trump are close with. The interviewer said, he, Peter Thiel, shows me a picture on his phone of him posing with Eric Prince, who founded the private military company Blackwater, and Mr. Trump, who had no costume, but joked that it was NSFI, not safe for the internet. Eric Prince, who founded Blackwater, is also connected to Donald Trump. They both just love war, and their goals are both the same, to dominate foreign regions and to wipe out more human lives. So sad.
Did your people ever kill innocent civilians?
It's entirely possible.
Blackwater has had a very cozy relationship with the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, from its inception, as well as Israel's Mossad. And when a brutal killing machine works alongside another killing machine, that's a deadly venture. And this is why it has been criticized, but has also got away with a lot of overseas killings. According to The Atlantic, after the 9/11 attacks, President Bush gave the CIA permission to create a top-secret assassination unit to find and kill al-Qaeda operatives. The program was kept from Congress for 7 years, and when Leon Panetta told legislators about it in 2009, he revealed that the CIA had hired the private security firm Blackwater to help run it. We were led to believe that Donald Trump was in conflict with the CIA, which is like a government within a government. Anyone with common sense should know that it's hard to swallow, for the CIA believes in torture and specializes in it. And Donald Trump also believes in torture, for birds of a feather shall flock together. The president has also given the CIA full authority to conduct drone strikes. No conflict there at all. But Eric Prince, though no longer leading Blackwater, he has now sold it, has expanded his venture and has patrol boats to protect immigrants from flooding into Europe. He also trains secret paramilitary forces in the Middle East and heads Frontier Services Group with CITIC Group, China's largest state-owned investment firm, where he is the executive chairman of that firm. China and the United States may be at each other's throats, but when it comes to business and making money, differences are put aside. Eric Prince also has strong ties to Christian religious right groups, which is something you need to keep a very close eye on, and Newsweek magazine gives you a solid profile on his religious convictions. He remarried in 2004 after the death of his first wife, converted to Roman Catholicism at Easter time in 1992. His family had been members of the Calvinist Dutch Reformed Church, though with an evangelical bent. No one seems to have been shocked or upset by Prince's embrace of Rome. Several knowledgeable friends who did not wish to be identified discussing private conversations say Prince talked about his reverence for the continuity of the Catholic Church, his desire to go to Mass every morning, and his appreciation of confession. Well, all roads lead to Rome. And what is not well known is that Eric Prince played a covert role in Trump's elections. Donald Trump elected a billionaire Betsy DeVos as his education secretary. So this is the Billionaires Club. The Washington Post says DeVos, 58, grew up in Michigan, where her father, Ezra Prince, made a fortune supplying auto parts to manufacturers. Her brother is Eric Prince. Cosmopolitan says that she was born in and married into a gazillion-dollar family. DeVos' husband, Dick DeVos Jr., is the son of Dick DeVos Sr., the self-made multi-billionaire, co-founder of the Amway Corporation and owner of the Orlando Magic. The DeVos family is among the richest people not only in Michigan, but the world. DeVos' brother, Eric Prince, who founded the notorious private military contracting firm Blackwater, now known as Academy, is a vocal Trump supporter who has spoken with Breitbart News in favor of Trump and gave at least $100,000 to the pro-Trump super PAC, Make America Number One PAC. During the 2014 and 2016 election cycles, DeVos and her relatives gave at least $818,000 to current Republican senators, according to the Washington Post. DeVos' critics have said that the breadth of the family's donations represent a significant conflict of interest, especially for the senators on the committee. This may be why she is so unpopular, but that family is not the only one who has pumped dollars into Trump's campaign. Another billionaire, Robert Mercer, a hedge fund tycoon, also funded Trump's campaign. He is a man who stays in the shadows and does not do any interviews. But Trump is not the only one who he funded. He also financed England's Nigel Farage, that played a key role in the Brexit campaign. Money sure does talk and influences everything. What about Goldman Sachs? They have former employees everywhere. Its current chairman, Lloyd Blankfein, says that bankers do God's work. Maybe someone should read to him James chapter 5 verses 1 to 6 in the Bible and how God describes how corrupt they are. But Donald Trump has flooded his cabinet and administration with Goldman Sachs cartel, and anyone believing that this billionaires club was going to be totally separate from the establishment is really, really naive. That's not how it works. To get a good PR look for the public eye, Trump has also had a meeting with many in the media in CNN, NBC and BuzzFeed. And even if he is criticized by different media outlets, the US Commander-in-Chief will have many in the corporate media who will defend his cause in his corner. But how much power will he have as Commander-in-Chief? He will have the keys to the most invasive surveillance state in history. This will give him immense power over intelligence data, and with Peter Thiel advising him with links deep into the tech world, this new president will tap into a source of power that your average person cannot even comprehend. For America is steering deeper and deeper into a surveillance state, and many are unaware that it is careering in a path that cannot be reversed. They are even giving the TSA powers to confiscate anyone's phones who enters into the United States. But to be fair, this is a road where most countries in the world are heading to. And the narrator filmed this facial recognition just before boarding on a plane in an airport in Holland. This is where we are going.
You put your finger here, and then you look into this camera, and it all gets recorded. But what has people up in arms is the fact that all this information is going to be recorded in one governmental database that may not be 100% secure.
So the $1 billion that the US funds Israel with has aided with the development of its surveillance state, where biometric IDs are now a must in Israel. Trump has many in America on panic alert for his immigration deportation program, but he is only continuing from the Obama administration with its own deportation of Haitians. The Huffington Post recorded that as Americans went to the polls in November 8, 2016, the Miami Herald reported that the US had quietly resumed deportation flights to Haiti a week earlier. The Department of Homeland Security confirmed in late November that more than 200 people had since been returned to Haiti. Johnson said they would significantly expand deportation of Haitians in the coming weeks. Trump has also attempted to put a ban on several states entering into the USA. It was at first overturned by a US judge, but Trump was not impressed at all. A survey conducted shows that there was a decline in support for the Muslim ban, except among white evangelicals in February 2017. But President Donald Trump insisted that he was again going to override the judge's decision. Though it is labeled as a Muslim ban, it is really only a handful of Muslim states. But which ones are they? The White House tells us that they are Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. Why are these countries a target? Oil. They are all rich or are alongside trade routes of countries with natural resources and have all been targeted, especially Somalia. And the New York Times is clear why the US is occupying these barred countries. The Somalia campaign is a blueprint for warfare that President Obama has embraced and will pass along to his successor. It is a model the United States now employs across the Middle East and North Africa, from Syria to Libya, despite the president's stated aversion to American boots on the ground in the world's war zones. This year alone, the article was written in 2016, the United States has carried out airstrikes in 7 countries and conducted special operation missions in many more. This may be the reason these countries are under a 3-month ban for fear of a retaliation by nations who know that they are illegally being occupied.
The executive order signed by the President earlier today, protecting the nation from foreign terrorist entry into the United States, is a vital measure for strengthening our national security. To our allies and partners around the world, please understand this order is part of our ongoing efforts to eliminate vulnerabilities that radical Islamist terrorists can and will exploit for destructive ends.
It has been shown that the chance of being killed by a refugee terrorist in the United States is 1 in 3.6 billion. And what is overlooked is that far-right extremists in both the United States and Europe are more prone to commit acts of terrorism. and though it is in the mainstream media, it is still very downplayed. The British newspaper The Times of London documented that big brands fund both Islamic extremists such as Islamic State and Combat 18, a violent pro-Nazi faction, where Mercedes-Benz and Waitrose advertises on their YouTube pages. But Hollywood also supports terrorist groups, even awarding them at the most famous film awards.
And the Oscar goes to... Okay, the White Helmets. The saints go marching in.
أن شعارنا أولا وأخيرا نحن كدفاع مدني فمن أحياها فكأنما أحيا الناس جميعا.
Many are unaware of the white helmets in Syria. They are presented to the world as these humanitarian good guys on the battlefield, and a British production team presented them so. But if you have researched what they are really about, and the double standards policy of the United States is a lot more dangerous than you think.
These organizations are relying on the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is based in Coventry, UK, and which is one man. They're relying on compromised groups like the White Helmets, which, let's talk about the White Helmets. The White Helmets were founded in 2013 by a British ex-military officer. They have been funded to the tune of $100 million by the US, UK, and Europe, and other states. They purport to be rescuing civilians in eastern Aleppo and Idlib, yet no one in eastern Aleppo has heard of them. And I say no one, bearing in mind that now 95% of these areas of eastern Aleppo are liberated. The White Helmets purport to be neutral, yet they can be found carrying guns and standing on the dead bodies of Syrian soldiers. And their video footage actually contains children that have been recycled in different reports. So you can find a girl named Aya who turns up in a report in month, say, August, and she turns up in the next month in 2 different locations. So they are not credible.
May I show you a picture?
Of course.
This young boy has become the symbol of the war. I think you know this picture.
Of course I saw it.
His name is Omran, 5 years old, covered with blood, scared, traumatized. Is there anything you would like to say to Omran and his family?
No, there's something I would like to say to you first of all, because I want you to go back after my interview and go to the internet to see the same picture of the same child with his sister. Both were rescued by what they call them in the West White Helmets, which is a facelift of Al-Nusra in Aleppo. They were rescued twice, each one in different incident, and just as part of the publicity of those white helmets. None of these incidents were true. You can have it manipulated, and it is manipulated.
Okay, you say no preference. There have been reports that Israel has been treating wounded Syrian rebel fighters in its hospitals on the border, including fighters from Nusra Front, which is, of course, the Al-Qaeda proxy in Syria. Do those reports worry you that Israel's helping wounded Al-Qaeda-aligned fighters?
As I said before, in a different context, it's always useful also to deal with your enemies in a humane way. And I think that when you have people who are wounded and you can deal with them in a humane way, the considerations as to whether to take them in are not simply whether it's politically useful or whether it's politically
contributory. So it's purely humanitarian, you say?
Yes, the US supports the opposition, but not directly. They support the countries that back us. However, we are still not satisfied with this support. They should support us with advanced weapons. We were winning the fights thanks to Tau missiles. With these, we gained parity with the regime.
There's an early 2014 email from Hillary Clinton, so not so long after she left Secretary of State, to her campaign manager, John Podesta. That email, it states that ISIS, is funded by Saudi Arabia and Qatar. The governments of Saudi Arabia and Qatar.
The Shia Muslim state of Iran, Syria's ally, can see what most of us cannot. Iran's leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, said former American officials created Daesh, Islamic State, and the current leaders are reinforcing it, as documented in the British newspaper, the Daily Mail. But there are others who are subtly adding fuel to the fire. Pope Francis I, who loves meddling in world affairs, pretending to be a peacemaker, wrote a letter to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad telling him to respect international law. Yet the Pope knows full well what's going on and overlooks the facts that the United States has sided with Islamic terrorist groups and is funding them and giving the public the impression that the United States are the heroes. The United States are fully in bed with the rebels in Syria, especially as the US allies are funding the very people who the US says they want to defeat, ISIS. And more evidence has come to light that when a $10 billion pipeline deal was struck between Syria, Iraq and Iran in 2011, it threatened US interests in the Middle East, and a former US ally, Assad's Syria, now became an enemy and a target. And the billions of dollars of US aid to Israel is being used very strategically by the Israeli military to bomb the Syrian capital, Damascus, at one of its key airports. This is why there is a Syrian refugee crisis, and even a French cement company is assisting the rebels in Syria, and very few people are aware how horrific this crisis is. And Assad is very skeptical of Trump, especially what he has seen happening in his next door neighbor, Iraq, by a president who is adamant that he wants to win more wars. If you see who Donald Trump went to for advice before he was elected, Henry Kissinger, then that should give you a clear picture that the United States will be continuing as a war-mongering culture. But how will the United States bring everyone else in the world in line with her program of global conquest? It is already dominating the box office by showing herself as the world's leading superheroes, even dominating the galaxies. But how will each society or state be structured? For nobody wants to give up their freedoms. Well, you control the environment and manipulate the way people think. If you were to ask your average person, do they believe that their governments have the technology to manipulate the elements? Some may say yes, and others will say it is not possible. Many will say they don't know. But can an environment affect the behavior patterns of a society on how they think, what they eat, and even how they treat each other? Well, let's see. The most peaceful and tranquil environment to be in is when you are around the greenery of nature. There is a peace when you are away from the noise of the cities and you are around natural surroundings. Studies have shown that it is more stress-free and it helps to cope with depression, and more people are planning to move to the countryside in the future in the UK. For the people there are a lot more friendly, there is less or no crime, there is more of a community spirit, and you appreciate life a lot more in those environments. Studies have also shown that modern life is having an effect on the deterioration of man's health. Sometimes you only appreciate the importance of your health when it is too late. And in 1939, the late Weston A. Price, a Canadian-born US-based dentist, described the contrast between modern life in the West with the simplicity of primitive cultures, when he said that the modern man is declining in physical fitness has been emphasized by many eminent sociologists and other scientists. That the rate of degeneration is progressively accelerating constitutes a cause for great alarm, particularly since this is taking place in spite of the advance of modern science along many lines of investigation. Some of the primitive races have avoided certain of the life problems faced by modernized groups, and the methods and knowledge used by the primitive peoples are available to assist modernized individuals in solving their problems. Many primitive races have made habitual use of certain preventive measures in meeting crucial life problems. The Chimane are an indigenous people of the Amazon in lowland Bolivia, a landlocked country located in western central South America. By looking at them with our modernized judgmental goggles, they don't look like much. But studies that were made available to the public in March 2017 showed that this primitive people are one of the most healthiest people on the entire planet, with the healthiest arteries ever studied. The lifestyle these people have gives them hearts that men in their 80s are stronger than men in their 50s in the United States. But one study on NBC News showed the key to their happiness and their longevity. It showed that the Chemain people walk, ride bikes or canoe everywhere. So an environment where there are no fumes by a bike, car, van, bus, coach or lorry. Their staple foods are homegrown rice, plantains and corn. If they want meat, they go catch it. And they don't watch television. So they have a healthy diet of natural homegrown food. They walk, ride bikes or canoe, and they do not watch television. So their culture is not manipulated by the propaganda and the clever psyops that we are bombarded with in what is labeled as the developed world. Let us contrast their world with China, a country that has a very long history and a very deep-rooted culture. According to World Atlas, it comes at number 1 as the least religious country in the world, where religion is also sadly persecuted. Young Chinese women are committing suicide at a very terrifying rate, though it is very downplayed. Its cancer rate is exploding. More than 4 million were diagnosed in 2015. Now why is that? There is an increase in lung cancer from air pollution, according to ABC News. And Bloomberg expands and tells us that it is not only a rise in air pollution, but high smoking rates and unhealthy lifestyles that have increased the rate of cancer. There has also been a huge increase in Western fast food franchises in China. The narrator used to watch martial arts films when one was a lot younger, and remembered that their staple diet always consisted of rice, noodles, vegetables, and a bit of meat. But as they want to match up to the West, they are suffering for it with dire consequences, with an obesity problem in China that is spiraling out of control. Now why is that? They have changed their diets to a Western diet, burgers for rice, and has come with a cost, according to the Daily Telegraph. Extended families in the world's most populous country had for centuries eaten a staple diet of rice, steamed vegetables, and meat. But increasing wages and busy lifestyles have seen traditional eating habits sidelined. Experts are blaming a new diet high in sugar and carbohydrates for spiraling obesity levels. China's rural areas have seen a huge growth in fast food outlets, particularly Western chains such as McDonald's and KFC. This is extremely worrying, said Professor Joe Park from the European Society of Cardiology. It is the worst explosion of childhood and adolescent obesity that I have ever seen. China is set for an escalation of cardiovascular disease and diabetes, and the popularity of the Western lifestyle will cost lives. More and more urban Chinese are white-collar workers who wake, sit at a desk, commute, and unlike the Chemain of Bolivia, watch TV, sleep, he said. So the modern city life and its quick lifestyle increases stress and an unhealthy lifestyle, and less community. And when you compare the Chinese to the Chemain, the two lifestyles affect the dynamics of the cultures. And studies are also showing that China is only following a trend of the West, who also suffer with high obesity for lack of exercise and their diets. But studies are also showing that more and more people all over the world are moving to the cities, where half the planet's population lives on just 1% of its land. This will make it a lot more easier to control societies. If half of the inhabitants of the earth are all squeezed onto a small minuscule piece of land, what effect or impact will that have in the not-too-distant future? In a book titled Cities Under Siege by an English author, Stephen Graham, he gives an insight on how cities will be used by globalists to experiment with warfare and to eventually keep the entire world under control. At the dawn of the 20th century, 1 in 10 of the Earth's 1.8 billion people lived in cities, an unprecedented proportion even though humankind remained overwhelmingly rural and agricultural. Between 1957 and 2007, the world's urban population quadrupled. By 2007, half the world's 6.7 billion people could be classed as city dwellers. Given the density of cities, more than half of humanity is currently squeezed onto just 2.8% of our planet's land surface, and the squeeze is tightening day by day. By 2050, fully 75% of the world's estimated 9.2 billion people will most likely be living in cities. In pre-modern and early modern times, cities and city-states were the primary agents as well as the main targets of war. A crucial element has been their capacity to centralize military, political, and economic activities, and in so doing draw otherwise disparate social formations into hierarchical and exploitative structural relations at variously extensive spatial scales. The portrayal of African American inner city youth in mainstream US media is strikingly similar to that of the distant terrorists being targeted by US imperial wars taking place far from the ghettos of the nation's cities. In both cases, the raw psychosocial material that feeds off imagined threats is all too easily manipulated into phobic forms. As Keith Dixon, a US military theorist of urban warfare, puts it, the increasing perception within Western militaries is that for Western military forces, asymmetric warfare in urban areas will be the greatest challenge of this century. The city will be the strategic high ground. Whoever controls it will dictate the course of future events in the world. So cities will be or are training grounds for how globalists plan to manipulate and to eventually have complete control over societies, especially when you see full-armed SWAT teams who are packing, patrolling a neighborhood, and treating innocent civilians like terrorist suspects. And with more people flooding into cities, they will be easier to manage. While many may think this is far-fetched and Hollywood creating fear, this is actually reality, where there are a number of terror drills in the United States, especially in New York, and they are training the police, like the military, who now have identical combat clothing, to crush protesters more effectively, whether it be Native Americans demonstrating for land rights, Black Lives Matters, or feminist groups. Whether you agree with their protests or not, Republicans are pushing for laws to put an end to all protests in the United States, where it can even be a domestic offense to demonstrate against President Donald Trump. I don't think people are fully aware of how serious this is. For one of the privileges that protects US citizens against government tyranny is that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The word highlighted in the First Amendment is peaceably, but unfortunately, recent demonstrations have abused and taken advantage of the First Amendment and are smashing windows, and people are looting, and this gives US senators a justification to pass new laws to ban all protests because a handful of anarchists have made it more difficult. And as the book Cities Under Siege said, blacks will be a target where they are compared to ISIS by a member of the US military.
We are preparing for any type of situation. Of course, anything dealing with ISIS is a concern. We do a lot of training in the event that we had a situation like what they had in Missouri.
There's actually written descriptions for how the equipment should be used, and it says it's specifically not supposed to be used for riot suppression.
African Americans are now arming themselves, but there are many Americans who know that they are only experimenting on the blacks for something a lot bigger, and are aware that they are next. And that is why all over the United States, gun sales have skyrocketed to an all-time high. Not that these guns can do anything at all against bunker-busting high-tech drones, but the NRA is still bragging on Twitter that Americans have brought a record 27 million guns in 2016. But for those who think that terror drills are only taking place in America, you are wrong. It is happening all over the globe.
To those who threaten our freedom, America will rise up.
All right, here we go.
And make no mistake, we will find you. And we will destroy you.
An attack has decimated the British capital.
Hollywood, who have futurologists as scriptwriters, always gives people a heads up of what is to take place in the future. And when a terror drill was being conducted on London's River Thames in March 2017, a couple of days later, on the same bridge of the River Thames, a terrorist act was committed. Coincidence? Who knows? But one thing which is quite strange is that any major terrorist act that is committed by a professed Muslim in the United Kingdom, whether an individual or men associated with a banned group, why are they all known to the British Secret Service? And how do they all just amazingly slip under the radar? It's strange. But even though the UK has been conducting a number of terror drills, like the United States, they are being conducted all over the world. In Africa, where the soldiers and special forces are being trained. In Brazil, they are training the military in counterterrorism. In China, they are also doing training exercises to deal with an ambush, as well as in Serbia and in France. And you may realize that all of these men in the military all dress the same. It is like a global uniform of dark clothing. But there is another way of controlling people inside of cities. And in 1928, Edward Bernays taught the US government and different companies how to control and manipulate the masses through social engineering, especially through the media. He wrote that if we understand the mechanism and motives of the group mind, is it not possible to control and regiment the masses according to our will without their knowing about it? The invisible government tends to be concentrated in the hands of the few because of the expense of manipulating the social machinery which controls the opinions and habits of the masses. If modern cultures are declining in health, and more people are squeezing themselves into cities, adopting the unhealthy lifestyles and habits of modern life, then you can more effectively control the opinions and habits via social engineering, where cultural shifts, structural changes, and moral decline will reshape society so swiftly and yet so subtly. For globalists, as this poster from the EU confirms, sees all of the inhabitants of the world in the bottom left as robots. People to be controlled, where everyone is carefully trained to all think and act the same, where different views are frowned upon and everybody acts in one accord. And whoever comes out of line and strays, social engineering will apply groupthink that will pressure and rewire their thinking back in line. But how do they plan on doing this?
Well, there they are. Our new electronic media, or our new gadgets. You push a button and the world's yours. You know how they talk about the world getting smaller? Well, it's thanks to these that it is. Everywhere is now our own neighborhood. But not only is the world getting smaller, it's becoming more available and more familiar to our minds and to our emotions. The world is now a global village. A global village.
Most societies have an elite, and elite tries to stay in power. And the ways they stay in power is not merely by controlling the means of production, to be Marxist, i.e. controlling the money, but by controlling the cognitive map, the way we think. And what really matters in that respect is not so much what is actually said in public, but is what is left undebated, unsaid.
So the best way to control a society is by manipulating how they think, without them realizing it. And the most effective way of breaking down a culture is to discredit God and the Bible, by letting each individual believe that they are their own God, then carefully strip all of their freedoms from them. You attack what God instituted at the beginning of time, community that starts with the family unit, and then you give young people a distorted view of sex from very early, and you can control the next generation. As the narrator lives in the UK, let us look at a scale model of what can happen to a society through social engineering. The late Mary Whitehouse was a staunch Christian advocate of sexual morality in the UK, and accused the late Sir Hugh Green, the Director General of the BBC, of using the media to corrupt and manipulate the thinking and morals of British society. British lawyer Lord Baron Hutchinson opposed her campaign against a play titled The Romans in Britain and its depiction of a homosexual rape. She wrote a book titled Whatever Happened to Sex, published in 1977, describing the importance of the right type of sex that should be taught to the public. The denial of man's role as child of God is not liberating, as the humanists would have us believe. It puts us in bondage to limitations of our own minds and capabilities. Man is made so that he cannot ignore God. If he cannot love him, he will hate him. It is of no mean significance that the secular, humanist, Marxist philosophy makes the destruction of Christianity one of its main priorities. We have forgotten that love is about giving, not getting, not about deadness of spirit and instant gratification. Throughout the 1960s, Britain was punch drunk. On the one hand, a continual stream of advocacy in favour of premarital sex, abortion on demand, homosexuality. Psychologists and sociologists came in on the act, swept away guilt, and with it, of course, conscience and morality itself. The liberators of the 60s have become the tyrants of the 70s. They sneer at fidelity, chastity, commitment to marriage, and the family. Glamorize and exalt the one-night stand, gay liberation, and in so doing, they destroy the community and emotional stability, which is essential to childhood security and social cohesion. If anyone were to ask me who, above all, was responsible for the moral collapse which characterized the 60s and 70s, I would unhesitantly name Sir Hugh Carlton Green, who was Director General of the BBC from 1960 to 1969. He was in command of the most powerful medium ever to affect the thinking and behavior of people, television. His determination to give the freedom of the screen to the protagonists of the new morality, to open the doors to foul language, blasphemy, excesses of violence and sex, had the most profound effect upon the values and behavior patterns of the day. Already, rape as entertainment attracts huge box office success around the world, as witness Clockwork Orange and Straw Dogs. The late Stanley Kubrick's 1971 Clockwork Orange does mention the glory of rape in the writing on the top left of the film poster. She continues to say that many children these days will have their attitudes to their own and other people's bodies molded by the type of sex education they are given at school. The fact remains that sex, which is God-given and the fount of our creativity, is becoming interned and preoccupying people with themselves. How our sexuality is channeled, whether it is sublimated in service, expressed in love, devalued by the sex cells syndrome, or degraded by the pornographers, will decide the quality of the society in which we live. Mary Whitehouse was depicted by the secular left as a Christian killjoy who was out of touch with modern times. But as she rests in her grave, her most fiercest critics are giving her a posthumous appraisal. Why? The English barrister Lord Hutchinson said she was right in her crusade about obscenity, as documented in the Telegraph and Daily Mail newspapers in October 2016. English actress Julie Walters also said that Mary Whitehouse was right to clean up TV, for they are beginning to see its effects on the young in the UK. The UK is proud that it is a nation that is becoming far more secular and less religious. But unbeknownst to the Brits, paganism comes with a price. While they think that they are free, more and more of their freedoms are being stripped from them. This is the price they pay. On Canterbury Square in the London borough of Islington, once lived a man who wrote what the state of England and the rest of the world would look like in the future, completely surveillance. His name was Eric Blair, but he wrote under the alias George Orwell. Many have said that the world has gone way beyond his dystopian view of the future, but they still quote the phrase on the first page of his book, 1984, Big Brother. In a building in England nicknamed the Donut, but better known as GCHQ, Government Communications Headquarters, its linguists, cryptographers, hackers, translators, and computer analysts are financed by the US's NSA to spy on the entire planet, and very few people are aware of that. The UK was one of the first countries to introduce CCTV cameras back in the 1990s as a response to the IRA bombings, and it still has at least 1/4 of the world's CCTV cameras. Even surveillance cars have them. The British police now have cameras on their uniform, and recent evidence has leaked that the London Metropolitan Police uses hackers to spy on protesters and even journalists from the Guardian newspaper. No one is safe. In the schools, teachers now wear body cameras to spy on unruly children. That is when you realize it is starting to get out of hand. Privacy in the UK is almost non-existent, where all the civilians' private information can be stored onto a government database, and not even British politicians, the members of parliament, are exempt. Most universities are now banning free speech in the UK, and only those who have money can enter into universities. The poor have no chance. Government cuts have closed down youth centres all over the UK, and when you go around London and the rest of the UK, the youth are bored and have nothing to do, and this will lead to an increase in more criminal activity when you destroy community. British women are more unhappier than ever. Doesn't secularism bring freedom and happiness? It has only increased misery. For English children are the second most unhappiest in the world after South Korea, and are among the least children with a lack of exercise. Children are also being sexualized from very, very early, where abuse of young girls is increasing in the schools by boys as a result of the high rate of watching pornography. And more pornography is taking over the minds of the young, and the narrator would like to say, is that if you are a parent and you're not teaching your own children about sex, don't blame the internet or the educational system. For even though you cannot check everything your child watches, you still have a responsibility as a parent to protect their minds from early. STDs are also skyrocketing among teenagers in the UK, where chlamydia is double the rate among girls than among boys. Scotland also has the second teenage abortion rate in the world after Cuba. And Mary Whitehouse was right when she said that how sex is taught will decide the quality of the society in which we live in. Children are also being taught or being confused of what gender they should choose. That is messed up. In the shops, men's wallets are being designed as women's purses. And young people seem to be constantly exposed to death with skull heads on the clothing section of top stores and t-shirts in the marketplaces. And if you want to know what young people see themselves as, you need to carefully watch the young entertainers like rapper Nadia Rose.
Large up the pagans then.
She says large up the pagans then, so they consider themselves as pagans. And this is as a result of eradicating prayers out of the schools, where scientists are trying to totally eradicate God from the minds of the British public. But also you have to observe what children are actually being taught in the educational system from very young. The draft document of the Welsh Assembly outlines the way in which moral guidance should be taught. Under Key Stage 1, the moral aspect of sex education must ensure that pupils know what is fair and unfair, and listen to this very carefully, what they believe to be right and wrong. Note that children are taught not what is right and wrong, but what they believe is right and wrong. The implication is that right and wrong are a matter of opinion, depending on what each person believes and not on any objective standard. This is the first step in introducing young children to the concept of moral relativism. And you could see the result of this false education in the 2011 riots that spread throughout England, where youth went wild. 3 years prior to that, in 2008, Time magazine said that British youth are unhappy, unloved, and out of control. When you want to de-Christianize youth and indoctrinate them with moral relativism, this is the outcome, where these youth are now under surveillance in a state that desires to be more pagan. Is not childhood meant to be something to be cherished? So that if you have a good home, a good community with strong moral fibers, it will protect you from having to cope with unresolved childhood issues in later life. Now that they have the thinking of most of the youth, they are now targeting the Christian youth and homeschoolers, categorizing them as being taught extremist ideas, and the British government is doing all in its power to amalgamate them with the state. This is social engineering.
Good morning, Nick.
Good morning.
The government proposes to have Ofsted inspectors go into scout groups, holiday church clubs and football clubs, other things like that, to question the volunteers and even the children about their thoughts and beliefs. Is Mr Wilshire ready and happy for Ofsted inspectors to be used as thought police, shutting down community groups in this way?
Well, we're not thought police, but you know what you've got to understand is that we have identified unregistered schools, so-called schools, unregistered settings in parts of the country that are putting significant numbers of children at risk.
The British government is pushing to pass a law to counter extremism, and if it is passed, they can turn up at a homeschooler's house unannounced, or even at an after-school club, and even in the churches. And anything that is being taught to under-18s that the state may see as offensive, they have the right to close it down. They categorize extremist ideology based on the hatred of others on basis of race, religion, denomination, or sexual orientation, which can lead, they say, to hate crime, including violence. Even civil liberty groups in the UK are calling these government measures extreme. But if they have their way, civil and religious liberties will be threatened. This is social engineering in the UK. But the United States is also affected by social engineering. And whatever policies or popular culture trends start off in America, it affects the rest of the entire world. The Occurring Conspiracy was a book published in 1980, written by the late Marilyn Ferguson, that documented a growing movement that was spreading among teachers, politicians, celebrities, lawmakers, artists, millionaires, psychologists, and men in the highest echelons in the US government to totally paganize the United States. But what effect would this social engineering have on the youth? In 1999, a school shooting was to totally shake America. It wasn't the first and it wasn't the last, but 2 high school students went into their high school on a rampage. People started to ask many questions. What led these 2 young boys to go berserk in their school? Many accused the boys' parents, who received a lot of death threats and had to move for pressure. Others said it was films like Basketball Diaries that shows a boy going into his high school with a trench coat and a sawn-off shotgun and killing students dead, which was closely imitated in the Columbine shootings. Others say it was a film that came out that same year in 1999, The Matrix, that also glamorized gun violence, where the guns used in the film are strikingly identical to the ones that were used by the 2 boys in their high school. Is the media to blame? Russian scientist Pavlov said, "We know that the same influence may produce a profound disturbance in some individuals and show no trace of effect on others, according to the power of resistance of the nervous system in each case." So some people can watch a film and be totally influenced, and others are not affected by it at all. But when Newsweek magazine interviewed the students in the aftermath of the Columbine shooting in 1999, a 17-year-old said, "Our generation is far more desensitized to violence than any other generation. TVs raise children now more than parents do, and television caters to children's violent fantasies. Parents are working more and spending less time with their kids." The article continues that of all the issues that trouble adolescents, loneliness ranks at the top of the list. Surveys of high school students have indicated that 1 in 4 considers suicide each year, says David Fossler, a child and adolescent psychiatrist in Burlington, Vermont. Cable and the internet have given access to an almost infinite amount of information. New technologies and the entertainment industry, combined with changes in family structure, have more deeply isolated grown-ups from teenagers. More and more adolescent life is taking place in a landscape that is inaccessible to many parents. The pop culture industry, marketing tribal styles through MTV and the internet, makes it harder than ever for adults to read their kids raised on rock and roll. Parents in the 50s could read the ripe sexuality of Elvis. They just might not have approved. But what to make of the much more densely encrypted messages and camp nihilism of Eminem and Marilyn Manson, who dare outsiders to take offense? How to distinguish a kid drawn to gangster rapper DMX for the rhymes from one drawn to the crimes? The nihilistic music of the 1990s brought early deaths to men in their 20s like Kurt Cobain, a heroin addict who suffered from depression, and eventually who ended his own life at the age of 27. The title covers of the albums of the late Notorious B.I.G., who was gunned down and killed at the age of 24, reflected how he prophetically foretold his own early death. And men like Eminem, who was in a bathtub of blood on his album cover Relapse, and Darkman X, who was also covered in blood on his album cover, and Marilyn Manson, all look very, very depressed and sad, deeply empty souls. And the tribal styles of modern music is also an initiation back to paganism, where the postmodern culture will be exposed to more nihilistic imagery of death, while their freedoms are also being stripped from them. The United Nations want to teach 5-year-olds all over the world about masturbation. Disturbing. But if you observe that children are getting more and more access to the internet from very early, they are getting exposed to modern music, and in the Philippines in Asia, you can see that young girls are being sexualized from a very young age. And guess where the influences are coming from? The United States. Studies have shown that the lyrical content of these modern songs is sexualizing the minds of teens, opening the door to promiscuity at a very early age. And parents are becoming concerned. And even if they frown at the United Nations agenda, big brands are marketing porn to children from a very early age, and organizations that people once thought were safe are also exploiting the vulnerability of children. And this could be one of the reasons why. Children are starting puberty at a very early age, and their bodies are developing very, very quick. And the narrator knows of parents who are concerned. The Daily Mail newspaper said data gathered from 4,000 boys across the US revealed that, on average, white and Hispanic boys go through puberty around the age of 10, while the average age is 9 for black boys. Similar results are in girls, where African Americans and Hispanic girls tend to reach puberty earlier than their white counterparts. So young girls are developing very, very quickly. There are different views why. Some say it's what they put in the food. Others say it's the chemicals in the plastics. But whichever one is true, big brands are exploiting children and are marketing to them clothing that is designed for adults. And they are sexualizing children from early. It got so bad that even in the UK, parents boycotted a shop called Primark to get rid of a skimpy bikini for 7-year-olds, for they said it is just going too far. But studies have shown that it has been developing for a number of years. According to PBS, in a 2008 study of 1,988 advertisements from 50 well-known American magazines, researchers from Wesleyan University found that half of them show women as sex objects. A woman was considered as a sex object depending on her posture, facial expression, makeup, activity, camera angle, and amount of skin shown. Sociologists at the University of Buffalo reviewed more than 1,000 Rolling Stone cover images published over 4 decades. They found that sexualized representations of both men and women have become more common over time. In the 1960s, 11% of men and 44% of women on the covers were sexualized, while in the 2000s, 17% of men and 83% of women were sexualized. However, they concluded that women were much more likely to be hypersexualized, showing a combination of multiple sexualized attributes. From the oldest fertility deities that have been discovered, we have seen that men have marketed women's bodies to advertise fertility cults. And man is not original in what he does. He is only reintroducing what the ancients did in the pre-Christian occult world. But why has it become so successful? This generation does not read books, and studies have shown that the parents of today are to blame for that, for not exposing their children to books from early. Reading expands your thinking and gives you a broader outlook on life. And in one generation, we have shifted from a print-based culture, where 30 years ago people once used to read, to an image-based culture where the digital age has now paganized modern culture by flooding them with enticing imagery. This is how the pre-Christian pagan world was once controlled, where people looked to images of dead men or animals as their gods, and only the priests could be allowed to read. And unbeknownst to the postmodernists, they have sunken back into paganism, and pagan practices that were once secret are now in the open. Edward Alexander Sutherland says that the first Greek fraternity, the Phi Beta Kappa, the parent of both secret and open fraternal organizations in America, was formed at William and Mary in 1776. One of its most famous members was US President Thomas Jefferson, who later became a Rosicrucian, and today fraternities now dominate US campuses, which is basically introducing students to the mysteries or secret societies while in college. But what do they promote? And why do you need to be initiated into something that is secret? Many of these sororities have been banned of recent for something called hazing, a crazy act that is performed as a final initiation, where in Pennsylvania State University, a sorority was shut down because photos of nude women were posted on Facebook. For an English girl group, All Saints said that they were told to go topless on top of the pops or be cut off from the show. This is social engineering, for even Britney Spears, though she may look happy in her videos, also says that women are pressured into being sexual. In other words, they don't want to do it. But social engineering is also making all music sound exactly the same, where there is no originality, and these same songwriters and producers are on all of the tracks. And one of the genres that has been most effective in sexualizing and degrading the young generation is hip-hop, where the lyrical content promotes nihilistic nonsense. This is the lyrical nihilism that has dominated a genre that has promoted lawlessness, but it wasn't always like that. When you contrast rap's earliest records, men look very happy and peaceful, like Rapper's Delight, compared to Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly, that promotes alcoholism, materialism, with a parental advisory label on the cover. Look at the group The Fat Boys. They're happy and they're smiling on the left. But on the right you have the group Onyx looking very angry, with one of them with a gun in his hand. Look at Busta Rhymes looking happy when he's in the group Leaders of the New School. Then when he becomes solo, he has that angry stare. This is a music video from the group the Wu-Tang Clan. It is titled Cream. They all look very angry, putting on this ghetto glaze. But if you look very carefully, it looks very managed and staged. You see, before they became a group, two of them had solo careers, and their producer, the RZA, was rapping about, guess what? Love songs, smiling and not looking like no gangster. Why a dramatic change? And the Jizza, also known as the Genius, he was also singing love songs with an R&B group, not gangster rap. As the music industry controls the careers of these men, they call the shots. This electro-funk group, World Class Wrecking Crew, has men in eyeliner. And the two men on the left, Andre Young and Antoine Carabie, dramatically turned into the gangster rap group NWA as Dr. Dre and DJ Yella. Wow, from dressing effeminate in tight clothing to looking like a hood rat. Do men really turn into gangsters overnight? It was the man second from left, the late Jerry Heller, who transformed rap into a complete gangster genre. He did with rap what rock and roll could not do, reach all the races on a mass scale. Rock and metal bands promoted loose sex, drugs, blasphemy and rebellion, but it only appealed to whites. But rap was to take on the same imagery and culture of lawlessness of rock and roll and spread it throughout the world. You see, Guns N' Roses had a lot of dark imagery of skull heads with two guns pointed to the brain. But in the 1990s and onwards, rap was to embrace the same imagery of death into the culture and accomplish what rock wasn't capable of doing. Rock was more open in its blasphemy. Rap was a bit more subtle. Rock fans were to also influence rap, with men now wearing tattoos all over their bodies. And once rappers started to adorn their bodies with tattoos, you just look all over the world and there is a high number of people now wearing tattoos as a result of the hip-hop culture. Drugs that was unheard of in early rap and was frowned upon started to influence it, beginning with Dr. Dre's The Chronic album, a salute to the glorifying of smoking marijuana. Why the fascination with drugs? In the 1980 book The Aquarian Conspiracy, it documents one of the New Age plans to paganize the thinking via drugs. For many people in many cultures, psychedelic drugs have offered a beginning trail if seldom a fully transformative path. And what effect do these drugs have on the mind? The individual may experience himself as a field of consciousness rather than as an isolated entity. Past, present and future juxtaposed. Space itself seems multidimensional, limitless. Matter is no longer perceived as tangible, but disintegrates into patterns of energy. Subjects report direct experience of microcosm, vibrating molecules and spinning galaxies, archetypes and deities. The reliving of early experiences, even what seems to be their own birth or uterine existence. In the experiences of consciousness of the universal mind and the void, LSD subjects find the very categories of time, space, matter, and physical laws of any kind to be arbitrary and ultimately meaningless categories. This is the Aquarian Conspiracy, and at UCLA, the University of California, Los Angeles, studies were carried out in 2008 on the lyrics of 341 of the most popular rap songs from 1979 to 1997 that mentioned taking drugs. Very little was mentioned from the 70s to the 80s, but after 1993, 70% of rap songs mentioned drug use. And Reuters documented this study and its glamorization of drug use in rap music that consists of marijuana and cocaine. Grandmaster Flash's White Lines, recorded in 1983, warns cocaine does nothing except killing your brain. But more recent tunes by popular rappers such as 50 Cent, as the world term refers to cocaine and heroin as positive things. Studies have shown that rap music is one of the most fastest growing genres in American pop culture today and plays a prominent role in youth culture. Social engineering. In Chicago, an ex-gang member who is now working to help youth in his community said how rap music had a very negative effect on his outlook on life, and said it is one of the leading causes of criminal activity in Chicago. Besides crime, he said that the rapper Future is telling our kids it's cool to pop a molly or ecstasy. Besides taking drug, what else does the rapper Future promote?
Magic City is a strip club. When you walk in, you throw money and girls get butt complete naked.
Magic City is a famous strip club in Atlanta that attracts the biggest names in hip-hop, where CNBC reports that strip club DJs are the real shakers in the music industry. And GQ magazine says that this Atlantic strip club runs the music industry, where the Daily Mail newspaper records that Drake is one of its regular attendees. When the biggest names in rap like Drake, Busta Rhymes, Funk Master Flex, and 2 Chainz are in a strip club, it will open up another door. For the most famous online hip-hop shows are Sway in the Morning and Vlad TV, who are entertaining and interviewing adult entertainer stars, pornographers, on their shows. This will not only expose more young people to porn stars, but it will normalize it also. This is social engineering. And not just in hip-hop only, but porn has always latched onto and capitalized on the latest trends and technological innovations that helps it to keep it in business. And corporations that claim they are opposed to porn endorse it by buying the tech innovations that will market it. If we go back a number of years, this statue of 16th century English reformer William Tyndale tells us a picture of technology in the spreading of the Reformation. For on the back of the statue is a Bible underneath the invention that helped it to spread, the printing press. It was Johannes Gutenberg of Germany on the left and Lawrence Koss of Holland on the right who introduced the world to the printing press, and while Bibles spread throughout Europe, destroying illiteracy, Italian playwright, satirist and poet Pietro Aretino used it to spread modern pornography. The struggle is not new at all. With the advent of photography in the 19th century that can capture still moments, the development of lenses spread as a result of pornography. And even on the sets of pornographic films, the latest cameras and virtual reality sets develop as a result of porn. Big brands like Diesel, known for making jeans, and the forceful vegan campaigners Peter, who use famous celebrities to market their message, have also branched out into pornography. If you study their advertisements for a number of years now, you could clearly see that they were both bordering on porn anyway. But what we are not told about porn is that 1 in 4 porn stars have STDs, sexually transmitted diseases or infections. It is an industry that is just rife with disease. But its influence is affecting the whole world. For the World Health Organization also says that more than 1 million sexually transmitted infections are acquired every day worldwide. That's frightening. And when we look at statistics and data all over the world, we can see a common trend that is getting worse and worse. And though porn isn't solely to blame, it does play a very big role. For there is an increase also in mouth diseases as a result of oral sex, something that is also central to porn. There is an increase in oral cancers, that is mouth and throat cancer, and smoking and drinking that were once the leading causes of mouth cancer are now being replaced by oral sex, social engineering. But the hip-hop culture is now opening up another door into sexuality, one that God calls an abomination.
Love and Hip Hop returns Monday, November 21st at 8, only on VH1.
The show, Love and Hip Hop, is promoting a black gay couple, which is seen as a new breakthrough in Hollywood. The narrator will show the dangers. But first, let us look at the beauty of a marriage between a man and a woman. The Atlantic magazine says that the black church helps men flourish in America. That includes family life, where faith in God also seems to reinforce black men's connection to work and marriage. Where, according to the Atlantic, our research has led us to conclude that the men who are most active in their churches are most likely to be employed, married, and out of jail. Studies in the United States and in the United Kingdom has shown that marriage between a man and a woman leads to better health. But the institution that God created at the beginning of time is under siege in America. For since the introduction of the welfare state in the 1960s, fewer than half of US kids live in a traditional nuclear family, and there has been a 9-fold increase since 1960 of single fathers who are disappearing in households across America. 1 in 3 children in the US live without their father, and there has also been a huge rise of single motherhood in America over the last 50 years. But the black community seems to be suffering the worst, with a high percentage of households run by unwed mothers with lack of fathers. What makes things worse is that films like Moonlight is encouraging and promoting homosexuality among black males. This is not going to help or give stability if there are no strong black role models in the home as fathers. It will lead to a downward spiral. It is well known that black movies really get a look in at the Oscars, but Moonlight was awarded Best Picture at the 2017 Oscars, and this will encourage more films to come out of that nature, especially when it is endorsed by one of the highest grossing actors in the world.
How did you feel about Moonlight?
I enjoy Moonlight a lot. You know,
I loved watching, you know, the transitions of all the, you know, brothers that played that one particular character. They were great. I'm glad Mahershala, you know, won.
Right.
Beauty and the Beast, a romantic story between a woman and a Pan-like looking creature, has been adapted from animation into film. But now they are incorporating a gay character into the new production. You would think that an abusive looking monster was enough, but the LGBTQ agenda is expanding. But even a journalist in the Daily Telegraph newspaper said that it misses the point of the main storyline. But Disney has not stopped there. It is now targeting children with the animation Star versus the Forces of Evil. And what was this cartoon, or is, promoting? Disney's first gay kiss. And what was the reaction? According to the LGBT website Pink, 1 million mums were furious about the gay kiss in the Disney movie. You see, there is an agenda to target the young from very early and indoctrinate them. And there is a reason why. Because the website Pink also said that the most banned books of 2016 on a reading list were LGBTQ books. In other words, people don't want it. And in the UK, if you disagree with it in the workplace, you could lose your job. Now why is that? Because studies have shown that you are not born gay at all. And even though it has been proven as a scientific fact, the LGBTQ are fighting back. For in response to the LGBT agenda study of Even at the Doors, they said that only idiots use the Bible as a guide to their morality. So the Ten Commandments, that is the basis for Western law, should be abolished. That would lead to anarchy and more chaos in an already unstable society that are teaching moral relativism. Others have said that religion is a poison for humanity. So Africa, according to CNN, who are among the world's most religious people, and the Asian continent, where religions will expand even more by 2050, are all filled with poison. This is interesting, for many of them believe that all religions need to be abolished. And the most vocal spokesman for the LGBTQ in the UK, Peter Thatchell, had to admit that gay rights robs others of their rights, that includes free speech, a liberty that was once essential to Western democracies. But the LGBT are campaigning for gender-neutral passports. They are pushing for transgender dolls to be sold to children. And the doctors in the UK are saying that don't call pregnant women expectant mothers, as it might offend transgender people. That is when you know it has gone too far. Dove has brought into the agenda with a transgender individual in their ads, and Time magazine has a shahim on the front cover where it says a new generation is redefining the meaning of gender. You don't even know what you're picking up nowadays. And Men Like 2 Chainz is wearing a skirt. Van Diesel is also wearing a skirt. And to justify this transgender LGBT agenda, people are saying that Jesus was wearing what we consider to be in our days a dress. Let's clear that up very quickly. In the British Museum, you can see that Greek men wore not a dress, but a robe. That was a similar attire of the men in the Middle East, like in Assyria, who wore not a dress, but a kind of robe. The earlier men of Ur of the Chaldees wore a kilt, and Egyptian men also wore not a skirt, but a kilt. That was the standard attire among men in a hot country. And you can clearly see that the man and woman's attire was clearly distinct and separate from each other in ancient Egypt. Many are totally unaware that the churches are also heavily influenced by social engineering. And for those who live in their self-righteous towers and think that their congregations are not under siege, well, that's what you think. Rapper Kanye West and gospel artist Kirk Franklin performed together on a show, a collaboration between the secular world and the church. and they are both setting a trend for the LGBTQ. Kanye West performs in a leather skirt at a concert, and Kirk Franklin also wears a red skirt at the 2017 Grammy Awards. And at those awards, Kirk Franklin was awarded Best Gospel Album. His album is titled Losing My Religion, a title that was borrowed from the group REM. What happens when the church looks no different from the secular world? You can't preach them the gospel when both the secular and gospel albums look exactly the same, promoting the same all-seeing eye. This is social engineering. Even the teachings of the modern church by the most influential pastors are not from the Bible, but are Gnostic and humanistic in nature. When the most popular motivational speakers teach their huge audiences that in order to achieve your full potential, you must unleash the power within, and when evangelical preachers teach the exact same thing to their huge audiences, that you must also depend upon your own heart and your instinct and not in God, this is social engineering.
So I don't go a lot of doctrine, and I go practical. Today I'm talking about using what God's given you, and so when you leave, you'll say, you know what, it was worth me going to church today.
Yes, it is good to be in the house of the Lord, and I'm excited to be here today with you. See, we were designed to function our best when we are connected to God. You've got power on the inside you can rely on.
A best-selling author, his latest book is going to be a runaway hit, Instinct, The Power to Unleash Your Inborn Drive. We're going to talk a lot about the book in a little while. I'm surprised at the title because I never heard instinct was very religious. Define it. Instinct is?
Instinct is an acknowledgement that we have been pre-wired with certain proclivities through which that when we are placed in those environments which we are attracted to, we are best suited to function from that perspective.
Joel Osteen told Morgan Freeman that he does not preach doctrine or a thus saith the Lord from the Bible. And his wife said that you have power within you can rely on, New Age philosophy. And even Larry King said that instinct does not sound religious. Even the secular world can detect when something does not follow the divine pattern. But the social engineering of the church is having a deep effect on the churches. And when the churches of today are dominated by praise and worship, and very little or no Bible at all, it does lead to a spiritual awakening. For when the churches start to look like they are no different to secular concerts, while many believe it is drawing people in, studies have shown it is driving people out. For millennials are leaving the churches in droves. Now why is that? They're not being spiritually uplifted by the word of God. For one study showed that nearly 70% of full-time youth ministers have no theological education. Why nobody wants to go to church anymore is a question that was asked by the Huffington Post. It has been proven that the contemporary worship experience has contributed to the decline of the church. It's been the trend in the last couple of decades for traditional mainline churches to pretend to be something they're not. Many of them have experimented with praise bands, the installation of screens, praise music, leisure dress on the platform. In other words, no standards. It is said that it has largely proven to be a fatal mistake. So the millennials are saying they want the old-time simple religion, a thus saith the Lord from the Bible, where the Washington Post documented that recent research from Barna Group and the Cornerstone Knowledge found that 67% of millennials prefer a classic church over a trendy one, and 77% would choose a sanctuary over an auditorium. The church is beginning to realize that worldly methods do not work, only the Bible does. For the churches tried to introduce chastity rings to help young people from overcoming premarital sex, masturbation, and watching hours of pornography. Now, you don't tell young people if you wear bling, you can overcome sin. And it turned out to be a complete failure. Why? Because churches are not teaching the realities of sexual struggles. And instead of depending upon God, they are looking to some new age amulet. This is what you tell your congregations. Dearly beloved, I beseech you as strangers and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts, which does what? War against the soul. You tell them the truth. It is going to be an all-out battle and intense war to the end. So the millennials demand simple Christianity. Now, how can the church avoid social engineering? In the north of England is a place called Kidderminster, and a 50-minute walk from the station is a statue of Richard Baxter, a 17th century English reformer, one of the very few men who opposed slavery in his time. And in his book called The Reformed Pastor, he said that the very design of the gospel is to abase us. Humility is not a mere ornament of a Christian, but an essential part of the new creature. We must study humility, and preach humility, and practice humility. In the United States was a brilliant mind who made over 300 products from the peanut alone. George Washington Carver was a 20th century scientist who also taught humility and self-sacrifice. For he wrote to a colleague in 1925 and told him that living for others is really the Christ life after all. Oh, the satisfaction, happiness and joy one gets out of it. You see, true Bible-based Christianity is meant to be completely selfless. You do not let criticism bother you. You praise God for suffering for his namesake. You do not spend precious time fighting with other believers. You do not get an ego when people are praising you. You serve the Lord and live a life for others without seeking for any recognition or any kind of earthly reward, where your life should be an example to the world. This is how you escape from the social engineering net. Let us now summarize this study.
War and rumors of war, Syria and North Korea, Russia-U.S. relations at rock bottom.
It is interesting when men in the media use the apocalyptic language of the Gospels to describe the current condition of the world. For the nations are angry, and men's hearts are failing them for fear for the things which are coming on the earth. For when you search for what people are typing for online, people are Googling World War III more than ever at an all-time high. You see, when you are a Christian and understand that God is in full control and not man, you don't really worry. For even the Doors has spent a couple of years now identifying two earthly kingdoms, the papacy in the old world and the United States in the new world, their rise to prominence and the key roles they will play on the world stage, and the winding down of world events, using one method, the prophetic lens, as recorded in Revelation chapter 13. While many may think that Donald Trump is a bloodthirsty psychopath surrounded by an administration of warhawks, he is only continuing US foreign policy that has existed for over a quarter of a century, especially in Iraq. And as social engineering is carefully welding every culture into one, this generation is far more desensitized to evil, so they don't have the moral power to resist it. They are less healthier. More and more people are squeezed into cities, so they are easier to control and manage. And as they don't read books, they are far easier to deceive than previous generations, for they are unaware of the background to what is going on in the world. As the cognitive mind becomes more secular, their freedoms are being stripped from them each day and sold to big corporations for profit, making you believe that you are in a war on terror. As the narrator always encourages the viewers, please research everything that is presented in the studies, and if life is spared, even the Doors will continue to update you on the current situation on this earth. Stay blessed.